AMN Drive Time is sponsored by Aishin, your trusted and reliable source for aftermarket automotive components and technology. Visit AishinAftermarket.com for more information.
Mike, welcome to AMN Drive Time, sponsored by our friends at Aishin.
Thank you, Bill. Delighted, honored to be here with you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Glad to have you at our headquarters in Akron today. You indicated this is the first time you'd been here.
Indeed, it is. And hopefully not my last. We'll know after today. So.
Okay, good. So Mike, tell us about how you got started in the industry. Did you find the aftermarket? Did the aftermarket find you? And what are the various roles you've held since the beginning?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Before I begin, though, I want to say something about you and your company. So I walked through the front door today, and I'm greeted from the moment I walked in to the moment I sat down here with you, and I felt comfortable, at home. I'm among people that have a pretty interesting culture. It's intoxicating. I think of 102 years. Babcocks. I found out this morning that you are third generation.
I am.
And I think of the tagline. I did a little research on you before I showed up.
Okay.
And simple yet profound, right? It's telling stories, connecting people, empowering the transportation industry since 1920.
Yep.
So let me, before I begin anything, thank you for the service that you provide, the people that you provide it with, and the people like me that you provide it for. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to stop talking like that.
You know what? I prefer 40, but if I can take 20, ask Larry Faby, he'll tell you.
Okay.
But anyway, how did I get started? My story is one of a continual journey of being able to stand on the shoulders of other men, other giants, men and women in the aftermarket. I was born into this business. I think it was decided even before I was born that I was going to be in the automotive aftermarket. And I worked for my dad at his warehouse in Monroe, Louisiana. Ray Mohler is his name. Quite the success story in his own right. But I worked for him through high school, graduated in 1984. So working at this warehouse distributor in Monroe, Louisiana, working in the warehouse, loading trucks, receiving stock, pulling orders, will call counter, a lot of the things that our distributor members do every day, all day long, that's what I was doing.
Yep.
Through high school and up into and through college in 1989. But what I learned during that time is, obviously I learned how, through Dad, how a warehouse distributor works, the way that they go to market, some of the challenges, some of the latitudes, just how an automotive warehouse distributor does its work. And I learned that. I think I had a cursory understanding of the automotive aftermarket at that time, at least from a WD perspective. But then I graduated in 1989 from college. Now you might notice there's a 5-year spread there, 84 to 89.
I didn't want to say anything, but I did hear. I did do the math, 5 versus 4.
I was a good, strong C student, and I had 1 year of misspent guidance, I guess. But I'm glad that I did, whether it's divine providence or whatever, because I stayed 5 years. Summer school, last session of my senior year, is where I met my wife of 34 years. And so I think things tend to work out for the best. So that 1 year off in college probably paid more dividends for me than ever. After I graduated college, I had the good fortune of running into a company called Federal-Mogul. A gentleman by the name of Ed Neal. Those that have been around a while will remember Ed Neal. He gave me my shot. I met with him. The Federal-Mogul was looking for a territory sales manager in East Texas, covering East Texas, northern Louisiana, southeastern Oklahoma, and southwestern Arkansas. And that job uniquely prepared me because I was a territory sales manager calling on warehouse distributors, calling on production engine rebuilders, custom engine rebuilders, calling on fleets, doing fleet surveys, calling on service dealers, shops, and then later After a stint of about 8, 9 years or so as a territory sales manager, Federal-Mogul had this job called Business Development Manager, where your job was to go cross-function, internally and externally, and then find new business. And there I picked up accounts in the small OEM, very small OEM, industrial, heavy-duty markets, and really began to get a wider perspective on what this automotive business is about, aftermarket business is about. I worked for Federal-Mogul from '89 to 2000 and decided to make a career change. I thought at one time I was going to graduate and to retire from Federal-Mogul. That was my goal. But life is a curious taskmaster sometimes, and opportunities present themselves. And things don't always work out the way you had it planned, but man, sometimes it works out for the better, right? So June of 2000, National Pronto Association, before all the group mergers, National Pronto Association had a president at the time, Ron Pyle,
Yep.
and Ron was moving on. Bill Maggs, who was the vice president of product management of Pronto, he was moving up into the president role, and he needed to replace himself. So I called Bill, just on a whim. Little side note, Bill's dad, Jake Maggs, worked for my dad, Ray Mohler. So you can imagine how the phone call went. It was, hey, Bill, congratulations on being promoted to president. That's great. And if you're going to replace yourself, I would love to tell you why I think I'm the guy for that. And by the way, I would love to tell Dad that you and I had a great discussion today. So I say that in jest. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, that Maggs-Mohler connection, that I think perhaps made the journey to filling that position with me perhaps a little bit longer than it otherwise would have. But what I learned at Pronto, and from 2000 up until this day, is what I continue to learn, is that I knew the business from a manufacturer standpoint. I thought I knew the business from a WD standpoint. What happened is I was able to get up, change hats, and walk to the other side of the desk, and all of a sudden I'm seeing things with new eyes. It's kind of like seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, right? It's just, you look at all of the behaviors, the demographics, the ways that WDs go to market, the constraints. Not as many latitudes as we would like, but lots of constraints, lots of challenges. So it was interesting to take what I learned at Federal-Mogul, which was a great learning experience for me, and begin to apply that and have that be accretive to what I already knew or was beginning to understand about the WD segment. At Pronto, June 2000 through, it would have been late 2014, early 15, I had moved from director of product management up to vice president and director of product management. And again, really had access to some of the smartest entrepreneurial people, whether it was our members or board positions or what have you. Really had access. My PhD in on-the-job training really began in earnest at that point. I began to learn the esoteric language between channel partners, whether they be distributors, manufacturers, and all the different varieties therein of each. So, and working in a fiduciary capacity, I began to understand that term. I began to understand different types of leadership. The one that I knew really not enough about at the time was fiduciary. You learn that a lot in the financial planning community and all that. Really putting other people first. Before your success, they have to be successful. So I began to learn that, and it paid off again. You know, these lessons continue to pay back. In 2015, when the Automotive Parts Services Group was launched, a joint venture at the time between Pronto and Federated Auto Parts Distributors. It was a joint venture out of necessity with an eye on relevance long term. We knew that if we didn't find a way to engage in co-opetition, as Darrell Waltrip would call it, on drafting at Talladega or whatever, if we didn't find a way to get comfortable with co-opetition, we were going to continually stay on our islands and continually fall flap back. So we began to understand that there's really no reason, and we picked up the idea from other industries, where competitors couldn't join together on key areas. And APSG's point, Federated and Pronto decided that, you know what, we can buy together. We can have vendor relations and vendor management together. And they said, we can pursue national accounts together because we need footprint. We need to be able to match up with storefronts all across the continental United States. We couldn't do that even at that time, but we were beginning to find our rhythm. We knew that there was co-man relationships at the Federated Co-man warehouse in Virginia. We knew that IT, and we're going to talk a little bit about data IO and IT, we knew that that was an area where we're spending gobs of money and duplicity of effort. We knew that there's ways to combine efforts there. So all of a sudden, APSG, a joint venture between Federated and Pronto, think of it as a superstructure where we got together and the boards, the members decided, okay, we want to do certain things together, and there are certain things that we probably won't. Marketing, trade dress, all the things that give individuality to the groups, probably going to stay that way, but the back room, the stick in the puck work, will be APSG. That went on for a couple of years, and then in late 2020, early 21, I believe it was, I may have my dates wrong, Parts Plus Network took a look around, and they said, you know, we kind of like what we see there, but we're going to do it a little bit different. Pronto and Parts Plus Network, they actually went beyond a JV and went to a statutory merge, creating a new company, Pronto Network. And that's important to understand because at that time, APSG, 50% owned by Federated, 50% owned by now Pronto Network. Things went on. We're beginning to understand the culture, beginning to, again, find our cadence, our rhythm. And then lo and behold, over a year ago now, the folks at Alliance took a look and said, you know, there's some things there that we too are interested in. So they did a joint venture, strategic joint venture with Federated. So I said all that to say this. These groups have come together on their own volition to do certain things together, as I mentioned earlier. And the way it's structured, the way I explain it to anybody that is interested is Federated Alliance joint venture owns 50% of what I do every day. Pronto Network owns 50% of what I do every day. So that is a 5-minute or so dissertation on what has been an interesting voyage up to this point. I look forward to many more years, but it's been an interesting voyage up to this point, dealing mostly with product management, vendor management, consensus building, you know, the fiduciary nature that you have to have with consensus building. So it's been an interesting ride, and I look forward to a lot more years going forward.
So, Mike, that's a great summary. Thank you. So you were with Federal-Mogul for an extended period. You've been with two companies. You had your family company, and then you were with Federal-Mogul and now Pronto in one form or another your whole career.
Sure.
So great job getting us today, 2024. What does your current role entail? You mentioned a little bit, it's kind of 50% here and 50% with the folks you work with, but what are you doing day to day?
Okay. I ought to be able to answer that one, right? So here we go. I have a colleague I should mention too. His name is Jason Scott. And Jason and I are both corporate officers with APSG. We both answer to Larry Pavey as our CEO of APSG. And I mentioned Jason because Jason and Mike Mohler, we work in tandem. To speak to one has become where to speak to one is to speak to the other. And our job, is as simply stated as I can, is all things vendor relations from a combined APSG standpoint, from vetting new suppliers, from managing and keeping relevancy with existing suppliers, contract management, communication of the supplier's message internally into the group. Also, there's quite a bit of strategy involved. We meet regularly with folks like Larry Pavey and Robert Roos at Pronto Network and Sue Gottschalk. And increasingly now we're seeing more interaction with John Washbish and JC Washbish. So some strategy involved there. And really one of the most important things is once you get beyond the negotiation and get beyond the putting together of programs with manufacturers, then it becomes how do you drive that through the organization that is comprised of very smart, entrepreneurial, independent business people. That's where the consensus comes in. So that's that is the most concise way that I would be able to explain it at this point.
So, as we talked, you've worked with program groups and on the supplier side, been on both sides of the desk, as you mentioned. So, are there any, I guess two things, are there any common challenges from the distributor side, the supplier side? And, from your perspective, any improvements, just your opinion, that can be done to improve relationships between distributors and your suppliers?
I wish I had an hour and a half to talk about that. That's a two-part question.
I know, there's a lot there.
No, but I will do my best to do so within a respectable time frame. So, challenges. The types of challenges that we see as distributors, and that as I saw as suppliers, and as related to me by suppliers of today, most of them revolve around elements to which we have no real control. And it's interesting because now you're working together as supply chain partners.
Yep.
It's a different mindset because now we've got, you only need to spend a few minutes with Paul McCarthy at MEMA Aftermarket Suppliers or Bill Hanby at AutoCare to realize the enormity, the expanse of the challenges we face. We are fighting now. We are on the verge of new technology sweeping through in terms of battery electric vehicles, and there's a whole discussion around that, this transformative, or really it's a metamorphosis from an infrastructure standpoint and a way to service that market standpoint. So outside challenges, we think of profitability challenges in a way that has affected by things that heretofore we've never had to consider. Think about tariffs.
Yep.
Think about the supply chain convulsions that we've been through and the result in artificial inflation and deflation of products by SKU. Think of COVID. My goodness, the pandemic. We did learn, I guess the positive thing is we learned that we are an essential industry. So if there is a silver lining in a dark day, and maybe that's it, we are an essential industry. We should be proud of that. So there's the external stimulus that we we challenge together. There is the overriding human condition that can be a challenge if you don't understand it and you don't become a student of it. Human condition meaning we all can do better, myself included, at listening to understand rather than I am so guilty of listening as I'm formulating my next response. To really listen to understand and understand that, okay, as a supplier, you need to understand that our members are not your customer. Our customer, we pursue the same customer, and that is the end user, whether it be DIFM or DIY. That's the customer.
Right.
We are supply chain partners. The word that comes to mind is symbiotic. We don't exist without the manufacturers.
Yep.
Manufacturers don't exist without us. Remember the old days of before we got into net quotes and special pricing agreements and all this stuff, there was the simple WD functional discount. We don't see that as much anymore, but the name is intended. The WD was providing a function, and so was the supplier. Value chain has changed a bit, but the fact is we are supply chain partners, and as such, we have to be able to talk about things openly, honestly. It's okay to ask for the moon on either side, but be ready with the why. Don't negotiate with sport. There's too much at stake. Be able to understand why you're asking for something from a manufacturer or a manufacturer of a WD or a group, and be ready to defend your arguments. Hearing no is not a bad thing, it's just an outcome. Hearing no for me is just an opportunity to improve my argument, right? So I learned that a long time ago that on both sides of the desk, if you're not uncomfortable asking the questions, you're not asking the right questions. You have to have relationships deep enough wide enough and trusting enough that you can delve into most any topic and then find your way out together. Sounds like Pollyanna, I know, but I see that the communication piece and the understanding and the definition of who is our customer and the roles that we play to get to that customer, a lot of our problems would just be eviscerated if we could just take on that mindset.
Mike, you've been involved in trade talks in the industry. You hosted a tariff talk last year on Section 301 tariffs, right?
Indeed.
Tell us about your work on this, if you would, and give us an update on the tariff situation.
Sure. I'll give you the update, understanding that while I've done a lot of work on it, I'm not professing to be the what's the word that I would use? I'm not professing to be the oracle on it, okay. But I have done a lot of work to understand it on behalf of our members and on behalf of our supplier partners. So Section 301, I don't think anyone would argue with the tenets behind Section 301 tariffs. It gets down to national security. It gets down to holding, in this case, China, accountability for what we see as IP protection issues. We see that as just China, and perhaps it's in regard to their Made in China 2025 program, where they're going to dominate. They've got a plan to dominate, just like we do, just like we all do. But as we look about it, China, at least from our perspective, there's IP issues. Again, there's national security issues that the government talks about. The wording that escapes me now really has to do with people say that they're bad actors on the world trading platforms. And I won't say that, but that's the only words coming to mind. So as we think about the reasons why 301 tariffs exist, I'll stop short of arguing for or against, because I think that this notion of turning on the other side of the desk holds true. I really think I could argue for and against. On behalf, if you talk to the folks at MEMA, Aftermarket Suppliers, they make a compelling argument for. If you talk to the folks at the National Retail Federation and the Americans for Free Trade, pretty convincing argument against. But at the end of the day, maybe it's not so much an argument for or against. It's with the way that the tariffs are being enacted and managed. Let me back up just a minute. So when tariffs came in, there were a couple of things that were given right off the top. None of us have ever had to mess with tariffs before. I say none. Most of us have never had to grapple with tariffs. And all of a sudden, we had products coming in and with an ad valorem tariff, where a unit would come in and it would have a 25% price hike on it. We had to begin to understand input tariffs and the effect that the steel tariffs would have or componentry tariffs would have in the making of goods, all manifested in a higher price. We saw where our inventory valuations were just this frenetic changing up and down because of tariffs. We had, again, the ad valorem, which is a lot easier to understand than even the input tariffs on widgets to make more widgets or different types of widgets. But we found that the way that the USTR, the United States Trade Representative, the way that they enacted these changes and the way that they communicated, or some would say didn't communicate so well, at least timely, some of the exclusion process. Imagine you're a buyer for XYZ warehouse distributor, and imagine you are tasked with all the things a buyer would be tasked with: profitability, GMROI, revenue, comps, you name it. But you have to decide, if I'm going to buy that product now at a tariff rate, or is the USTR going to exclude these tariffs through their exclusionary process, which would mean that if I buy them a month from now, they're going to be 25% less. So the timing and the efficiency of inventory has just been crazy trying to keep up with that. The terms LIFO and FIFO and all that have never been more significant because of the way that we're valuing our inventories. We had designs on trying to track a tariffed SKU all the way through our business to the street. And lo and behold, necessity and invention, we did. But the fact is, it wasn't sustainable to do that across all the different categories and all the tariff positions. So, where are we at today? We know that tariffs are essentially baked in to our supply chains today. Suppliers would tell you, for the most part, tariffs are baked in. There was a promise early on that they would be refunded back out of the government. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And I don't want to say too much. I don't want to be audited. But suffice to say, those monies did not come back through the channel as we hoped that they would. But because of that, the winners and the losers, there's a new line of distinction between how you win and how you lose. The people that understood early the effect that tariffs was having on inventory values and the timing of inventory values, the effect that it was having on street price once we sold into the marketplace. And let's not forget, on top of that, we had supply chain price increases. We had the underpinnings of overall inflation. So all of a sudden, we have prices being jacked up. We have tariff goods in and out, vacillating up and down. So how do we go to market? I think the way you succeed is how well and how quickly you can respond to the changes in the values of the product you're buying, and the way that you can replicate or actually put through those changes into the sale price, into the street. And let's not forget, we have competitors and we all hold each other accountable. So all these decisions may be easier in a vacuum, but in the real world, it's not always that easy. So I had a chance to do a tariff talk with John Gold and his team at the NRF via their Americans for Free Trade webinar series. And what I found is these challenges we face, we tend to think that they're picking on us. These are agnostic to whatever industry you're in. In fact, during the webinar, a funny quick story, Larry Pavey, he's texting me as we go. I had my phone on, and I shouldn't have. But he's texting me, and he said, you know, this is real time. He says, what you're saying is interesting, but I want to hear more about the duck feather guy. Because the duck feather guy, I believe it was from Downlight Industries. The whole exclusion process is whether or not you can convince the government that you can't get products anywhere but China, right? Well, where do you go for duck feathers? You go where most people eat the most ducks, China. So as he was talking about duck feathers and the down industry, and I was making the quantum jump into our business, we're the same. We were affected by the same things. So that really was an aha moment for me. It wasn't just about the automotive business like I thought it was. It affects everybody. So where do we go from here? The United States Trade Representative is supposed to be giving guidance end of May. And this is after a succession of postponements of this 4-year review process since tariffs were into the 5th year now. Interesting point, over $200 billion have been paid and laid out by exporters directly related to tariff funding. Forget the number, let's just call it more than $250 billion. It's a lot, right? So it's important that the USTR conveys messaging clear and concise as to what plans are for tariffs. Are they here? We're hearing now, election year, China made in 2025, inflation, de-risking, moving in and out of China. We're hearing where tariffs not only may they not be extended on exclusions, they may be going up, double, triple. And if China ever moved into the permanent national or lost their permanent normalized trading relations, that would be really akin to, I wouldn't say an apocalypse, but pretty close, because you can't come back from that. You become persona non grata at the World Trade Center if you are centers of world trade. So I personally believe, my opinion, tariffs are here to stay. I can see on one hand, if you're a manufacturer, there's a lot of beauty in holding your Chinese competitors responsible and accountable for things of the past or things that enable them to be at a lower price point. But I can also see the other side of the equation, the complexity, the uncertainty, the sheer amount of disheveled uproar that this causes on our financials and the way that we manage it. I can see both sides, but pragmatically I would tell you I believe tariffs are here to stay, and if anything they may be going up versus staying status quo or being eliminated.
Let's talk about procurement. What opportunities do you think exist for better procurement strategies? And how does technology play or not play a role in that?
Well, another great question. I can see now why you do this. You're suited for this. Great questions, right? So, procurement. We stand at an interesting time. Those that read history, study history, even recent history, you can go back to 2000. And Thomas Friedman told us that the world was flat. And he talked about the access to information, namely internet browsers, Google, and people like that. Access to information about business, about other people, about just about anything you want to hear about, you can find via Google. Industry 3.0, I think, is what some would call it today. Just the effect that access to information, the curating of that information and how we use it begins to really become in vogue. We saw that. I guess people would call that the age of the computer, if you will. But we recently did a talk with the folks at Northwood with their Leadership 2.0 class, and we talked about we stand on the precipice now. In fact, some say we've already crossed over the event horizon, where that is Industry 4.0, which now it's more about information and imagination and how you use it. So Industry 4.0, again, I'm not the oracle, but I've studied it enough to know that AI is just one piece of Industry 4.0, so I'll concentrate on that. And rather than lean towards AI as this sentient being that is going to take over one day, that may happen, but not in a couple of lifetimes from now, I don't think. AI for us really is about harnessing the power, the ubiquity of the data. We've coined a term, it's not ours, I heard it somewhere else. Infobesity. We just got too much coming in. How do we manage it? How do we curate it? How do we make it actionable? AI, as explained to me by a good friend of mine named GGO from SEMA Data, I asked her to try to give me a good layman's working definition of AI for today's use. One word response: algorithms. And what she was saying, of course I nodded knowingly, but then I went back and started thinking about what she said. And indeed, it's about how do you take this enormous amount of data coming at a high velocity, unstructured, high degree of variability. Just the volume and the variability alone is enough to you just choke on the data. How do we use big data analytics? How do we use new thought processes, new skill sets to be able to harness the power of the data? Otherwise, if the data comes to us and we don't know what we're doing with it, and we don't maximize it or optimize it, I was telling Mike earlier, it's like the greatest story never told. The problem is we have competitors that are very skilled at taking this data, using Gigi's term, algorithms, and they're able to optimize pricing. They're able to the street. They're able to optimize inventory, logistics, customer relations and customer service. There is a whole, when you think of the way that AI is being used, optimized in the optimizing the independent automotive aftermarket, it's profound. It's profound that in a way where the folks at Accenture, and I know this because I recently gave this talk, right? The folks at Accenture say that through optimization tools alone, they're seeing margin increases at a minimum of 5% margin. They're seeing promotional spend budgets being decreased by a factor of 10% or more. And then they're seeing, through all the other optimizing and all that, revenue generation, 15%. So where do you go in today's world for that type of quantum leap? A lot of people would do questionable things to be able to arrive at those types of numbers. So, and that's just one person's view of what one company said, Accenture, about the tangible benefit of how the thought leaders, the early adopters, are using AI. Again, love algorithms, not HAL 9000 or whatever, right? iRobot. So that's how I see procurement. I see procurement changing in a way that those that can harvest and manifest the data the best, the most quickly, velocity, variability, and volume, they're the ones that are going to win. They're going to be the ones that are hiring a new breed of talent, new skill set. Specifically, I think of the term data scientist. I got to thinking, do we have one? We probably do, although we haven't called them that. And do we need more as an industry? Sure we do. We need data scientists. We need people that are trendsetters, trend spotters rather. We need people that can absorb data, make it actionable, and then inform management on the best way to proceed. Data science and the scientists that embody that discipline, I think they're going to be more and more important to us going forward.
So Mike, you're involved in our industry outside of your 9 to 5. The proverbial 9 to 5. I'm sure you work more than 9 to 5. Tell us about some of the organizations you're involved with, boards you've served on, lessons learned from that activity.
I said earlier that my career has been studying and walking amongst giants, right?
Yep.
Learning from very learned people, the on-the-job PhD training. And I think nowhere is that more manifested than in the advocacy, the industry realm. I think of auto care, and I think of the education committee, working through and chairing that committee, and seeing the good work that they were doing and how that fit into all the other committee work that the industry was up to. I think of moving into the marketing communications committee and understanding how their job was they were tasked with bringing in all the work and making it cohesive where it meant something on the outside. And then I think of government affairs, public affairs, advocacy. And then I don't have to think long, I think very, very much about Rodney Perini and then the folks at CAWA and the advocacy and everything that they bring to bear out west for California, Nevada, and Arizona. So whether it's serving on or chairing the board of directors at CAWA or one of the committees, maybe it was all the way back 10 years ago, 15 years ago with Sue Kalish, sitting down with the what she called a blue ribbon task force on how to drive new people and new talent into our industry, job awareness, career lattice, if you will, not so much even career ladder. So I think about all these things, and what have I learned? I've learned that, ironically, if it is to be, and this is a lesson I've learned from my dad, if it is to be, it's up to me. And what do I mean? You might be thinking, well, how does that fit into a discussion about teamwork in industry? It's a little bit of an oxymoron. It simply means I've got to be a catalyst. It means I've got to show up and participate along with other people. It means that I can't sit back because of the 4.8 million others in the industry and wait for somebody to get involved. I got to get on a plane and I got to go to Washington, D.C., get out of my comfort zone and sit down on Capitol Hill and talk about the issues that face all of us. So I began to understand through industry interaction, the quality of the people that call this industry home, the power of a unified and collective effort, the power of taking personal responsibility for getting involved, not necessarily the result, but I'm responsible for getting involved and being part of an overall solution. So I've learned that industries are living, breathing organisms. Yeah, they're full of human beings. Human beings need to decide on their own merit. Am I going to get involved or am I going to leave it to others? The future's being written. Am I going to be a part of holding the pen, or will I let other people write it for me? So we got great associations. I've even done some work, tangential type work with Paul McCarthy and his team sitting on panels and some things at MEMA. And what binds us all together is so much greater than the challenges we might face as competitors or co-opetition, back to that term. The juice is worth the squeeze. It's as an industry, we as participants must get involved. We're all going to be better off for it. So that's my, hopefully Bill Hanby and Paul McCarthy would be happy with my message.
I'm sure they would. So Mike, it is tradition on drive time to do something we call the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to give me a quick answer. All right?
That's hard for me, but I'll do it. Okay, quick
All right,
answer.
you tell me, it'll be obvious one
Okay.
way or another for you.
Okay, all right.
Are you ready?
Man, I'm ready.
Automatic or stick shift?
Stick shift.
DIY or DIFM?
Both for different reasons, and I could go on to that, but I can't really choose because we serve both markets. And
You love them both.
Both are important. That's right.
What's the one most amazing place you've ridden your Harley?
I am a fortunate soul that could point to a lot of places, but it would be Pacific Coast Highway from San Francisco up towards Oregon and over and back down through wine country with my dad and a guy by the name of Eduardo Menendez, one of our members at the time. So it would be PCH, and there's some close rivals, but that would be it.
What's the number one sports team that you root for?
That's an easy one.
It is?
The number one sports team would be the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, America's team.
Well, okay. Well, maybe Roger Staubach's America, but maybe not so much now. It's amazing how comfortable we've become with mediocrity. But having said that, that's professional level. And I know I'm awful close to Columbus, Ohio, to be making this statement, but on the collegiate level, being from Louisiana, it's no question it's LSU. So I may need a ride out of here today undercover, but no disrespect to our friends in Columbus.
Just as long as you didn't say the University of Michigan, that's all we really get upset about.
That's right. It's not my first rodeo, so.
So when you get a meat and three, what do you order?
Chicken, brisket, sausage.
Beach, mountain, or city for a vacation?
Beach.
Last one. What is a motto or mantra that you try to live by?
The deepest thing that I can think of is one that comes to mind pretty quickly. I would tell you from a business standpoint, it would be, if it is to be, it's up to me, and that's the lesson I learned from my father. But from a personal standpoint, man, I just don't get too high, don't get too low. Things are going to work out. I know how this story ends. And I try to understand that most things aren't personal, even though they feel that way. Take time to listen to people and respond. And don't listen to respond, but listen so that you can respond. So I think the overriding thing that I live by, live a godly life, love other people, do the best you can, and move on down the road.
Mike, great to have you on AMA
Thank you.
Drive Time, sponsored by our friends at Ishin.
Thank you. Much enjoyed it. Appreciate the opportunity.
AMN Drive Time is sponsored by Ishin, your trusted and reliable source for aftermarket automotive components and technology. Visit IshinAftermarket.com for more information.